In this video, I'll show you 3 different illustration styles in Illustrator. So here we have a picture of some bok choy, and I have 3 different versions of the bok choy illustrated down here using the same paths drawn for all 3 with just different styles applied to them. Let me show you how to achieve each of these. There's a watercolor style, a sort of cartoon style, and a scribbly style. Let's start with this watercolor style. I'm not going to need this inner part for this style because we're going to create this view of sort of the rib of the bok choy using a color gradient instead. So I'm going to select this shape, and the first thing I'm going to do is change the stroke to this kind of sketchy charcoal style that I think goes better with the watercolor style. So with it selected, I'm going to go to stroke, and I'm going to select just one point. That'll be good for now. And then I'm going to open up Windows and get my brushes out here. And I'm going to apply this charcoal feather stroke. It's under the artistic set of brushes. That line is a little bit too wide now, so I'm going to narrow it down. And 0.25 is pretty good. And now I'm going to create this watercolor sort of fill that we have to these leaves of the bok choy. I'm not just going to fill this shape because in a watercolor style, the color often doesn't reach completely the outline. Sometimes it goes a little bit past the outline. So I'm going to create that fill using a different shape. I'm going to lock the path that I have for my outline here and add a new sub layer. And in this layer, I'm going to paint in my fill. I'm going to use a tool called the blob brush, and the blob brush works a little bit differently from the paintbrush, and you'll see how. It creates a shape rather than just a stroke. So I'm going to go in here and just roughly draw in this shape, and you could use a smaller brush, it doesn't matter. You don't have to fill it completely, just outline it completely, okay? Press V to select it. Now I'm going to press A, and I'm going to click on one of these anchors that's in the inside and press delete once, delete twice. I'm going to do that again down here, delete once, delete twice, and now I have a complete shape. It's totally filled. And I'm going to fill this with a gradient. So I'm going to go to fill, and I'm just going to choose the gradient here, and then go to gradient options. And now I have this tool here that will let me start to edit the colors here. Instead of this black color, I want a nice dark green color. Oh, see, I applied it to the stroke instead of the fill. It's not what I wanted to do. Control Z. I'm going to make sure that I'm down here on the fill in the appearance panel. And I don't want to stroke at all, so I'm going to turn that off. Okay, I'm on the fill. And now I want this color, double click on that dot to be this dark green. I want this one, double click again. I'm going to set that to the light green. And now I can sort of scooch this over. And if I click edit gradient, either here or here, I can now rotate this gradient. So I'm going to put the dark green at the end and the light green at the other end, and I'm going to stretch this out, grabbing the handle on the end there, so that the green, the darker green, starts a little bit later on my leaf. And now I have the gradient, and that's the first layer for my watercolor. Now I'm going to add these kind of watercolor strokes on top of this gradient. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a brush with a watercolor brush at a very low opacity, and I'm going to use a setting that we've never used before. So the order that I'm doing this in is very important, okay? So I'm going to select this shape, and then over here at the very bottom of my toolbox, there's a little icon that says drawing modes, and I'm going to choose draw inside. Select my paintbrush. I already have a watercolor paintbrush selected. Select the color that I want to paint with. And I'm going to lower the opacity to somewhere between 10 and 20. I'm going to go 14. And because I have draw inside turned on, even though I start the stroke outside of this shape, it's not going to paint outside. So I can just drag that and add little blotches. Let me do that again. I'm just going to Control Z to undo those things. I'm going to select this shape, make sure draw inside is chosen, choose my paintbrush. I'm going to use a watercolor brush. Yeah, that happens. I did the stroke instead. So draw inside, paintbrush, watercolor brush is already selected. I'll select my color, and I didn't lower my opacity, so let me lower my opacity. There we go. And then I can add my brush strokes in. And that's how you get this watercolor effect. So for this bok choy over here, all I did was apply this similar effect to each layer. So I added the gradient first after changing the outline to kind of a charcoal stroke, and then used the watercolor brush with paint inside, drawing inside, selected over here. It's really important. You'll see this little frame show up. That tells you that you're in drawing inside mode. And then you can add your sort of very subtle watercolor strokes on top of the gradient, and that gives you this effect right here. And now we're ready to go on to the next style. This cartoon style will be much more familiar to you. The thing I want to emphasize here is the stroke. The stroke adds a lot of style to this. So first I'm just going to select each of these shapes and fill them with the color that I want. And make sure that they're in the right order so that the lighter color is on top. And now I'm going to select this, click on stroke, and choose this width profile 5. It's narrow at one end and flares to the other end. And I want you to notice down here next to profile there's this flip along, and it will change the orientation of that stroke, and that affects the way it looks. So again, stroke, I'm using with profile 5, but you can experiment with others. And if you don't like how it looks, you can flip it to change it. And that's how we get this effect. The colors are very important with this style. You want to make sure that everything's not the same color so that there's some contrast between one leaf and the leaf underneath it, and you'll get this style. Now let's move on to that third style, which is kind of a scribbly style. Okay, for this scribbly style, just to make it clearer, I'm going to separate this rib shape from the leaf shape, just so we don't get confused. And I've got a stroke on this, and I'm going to change that stroke to the color that I want for my leaf. Okay. Now I'm going to use my brush, and I'm going to use a stroke, brush stroke that looks like scribbles here. And you've got lots of different brushes. Look through them, find the ones that you like. And it applies it to the outside. That's not what I want. I'm going to Control Z to undo that. Go over here and make sure I'm drawing inside. And now I can apply that stroke in lots of different directions to make this kind of hash shape, this kind of hash pattern on it. So let's do that again with this one. I'm going to change the stroke to the color that I actually kind of want to fill it with. Make sure that I am, instead of drawing normal, I'm drawing inside. Choose my paintbrush, make sure I've got the right brush selected. And now I'm going to use this in lots of different directions to get that appearance that I want. And now I can drag that on top of the leaf, and I've got this kind of scribbly style. There's lots of other brushes you could use in this same way. As long as you have that draw inside selected, you can apply them over and over and over again until you get that kind of pattern that you like inside the shape that you've defined. And that's the third style. I hope this helps you think of different ways to create your own illustrations.